The silent cage. The mining station floated like a ghost in space, hidden in the shadow of a dead moon. No one spoke its name. No one asked what happened inside. Workers came, machines worked, and screams were ignored. Inside the dark lower levels of the station, past the noise of drills and heat of furnaces, there was a small rusted cage. No one cleaned it. No one looked inside anymore. Most forgot it was even there. Inside that cage sat a thin alien with gray-blue skin, glowing eyes, and deep scars. He was known only as Unit 731. No one knew his real name. And even if he wanted to speak, he couldn't. His throat had been cut long ago by his masters. His voice was stolen. His freedom was gone. He sat still, silent like the dead. He had no hope left. One day, the power unit in the lower wing broke down. Management called a human engineer, someone cheap, someone replaceable. His name was Daniel Cole, a 29-year-old Earth technician who needed money more than safety. Daniel didn't ask questions. He only wanted to fix the power and leave. But when he stepped into the lower section, he felt something strange. The air was cold, heavy, silent. As he passed a row of broken pipes, he heard something, a faint sound, like metal scratching stone. He stopped. Again. Scratch, scratch. He turned his flashlight toward the corner. There was the cage. Daniel moved closer. At first he thought it was empty, but then two glowing eyes looked back at him from the shadows. The figure didn't move, didn't blink. Daniel stepped back, startled. What the hell? Then the figure slowly raised its hand and tapped the cage bar. Once. Not a threat. A call. Daniel bent down. Hey, can you hear me? The figure nodded slowly. Who are you? No answer. The alien tried to open its mouth, but nothing came out. Just air, just pain. Daniel frowned. Can't speak? The alien nodded again. For some reason, Daniel didn't walk away. He looked around, then reached into his tool bag and pulled out a small metal flask. Water. He opened the cage just slightly and passed it through the gap. The alien took it with, shaking hands, and drank slowly. Daniel saw the burn marks around his wrists, the heavy collar, the scars on his face. Something twisted inside Daniel's chest. Anger, maybe. Or sorrow. This place? Daniel whispered. What are they doing down here? The alien looked at him, and then did something unexpected. He reached down and picked up a small piece of black coal. Then he turned, and on the wall behind him, he began to write. The letters were crooked but clear. K-A-E-L, Kyle. That was his name. Daniel stared. He felt a chill run through him. Kyle! Suddenly a loud voice came over the intercom. Engineer Cole, report to the main panel. System reboot required. Daniel jumped. I have to go, he said quickly. I'll come back. Kale nodded. Daniel ran, but his heart was still back at the cage. That night Daniel couldn't sleep. He kept seeing those eyes. That broken voice. That name. Kale. He had seen aliens before. He had worked in many places. But this was something else. Kale wasn't just a slave. He was forgotten. Buried. Left to die in a place no one cared about. The next day, Daniel came back with a small pack of food hidden in his toolbox. He hurried down to the lower level. He reached the cage and stopped. The cage was empty. The chains were broken, and on the ground, there was blood. Fresh blood. Black and wet. Daniel's breath caught. No. He looked around. Kale? No answer. He stepped closer and saw something on the wall. Another coal mark. Just 2 words. They know. Daniel's stomach dropped. Someone had found out. He turned and walked away, fast, heart racing. But he didn't leave the station, because now it wasn't just about a broken generator or a silent cage. Now, it was personal. He had to find Cale, and maybe, just maybe, save him. Daniel didn't sleep that night. Even with his body aching from crawling through pipes and repairing burnt circuits, his mind stayed awake. The image of Cale, the alien with glowing eyes and no voice, stayed in front of him like a ghost, and the last words written on the wall kept repeating in his mind. They know. Daniel had seen many things on different planets: violence, hunger, greed. But Cale's silence felt heavier than any scream. And now he was missing. The next day, Daniel went back to work like nothing happened. He smiled at the guards, nodded at the staff, and kept his head down. But inside, he was searching, listening, watching. He needed to find Cale before it was too late. That evening, he found an old man sweeping the corridor near the slave halls. The janitor was slow, with tired eyes and a crooked back. Daniel walked over and pretended to check a control panel beside him. Quietly, he asked, "Do you know what happened to the one in the cage?" The janitor didn't look up. He just swept slowly and muttered, "Silenced ones are taken when they break the rules." Daniel's voice dropped. "What rules?" "No food. No writing. No kindness," the old man whispered. "They call it conditioning. Break it, and you're sent below." "Below?" The man nodded once and then walked away. Daniel's hands turned cold. He knew what below meant. There were rumors. A place beneath the station. A place not on any map. A place where screaming wasn't heard because no one survived long enough to make noise. That night, Daniel snuck into the control room. He waited until the guards took a break and then hacked into the security logs using his engineering codes. He searched the last 24 hours. Cameras, access logs, activity files. Nothing. Then he noticed a file labeled Transfer, Specimen 731, Level D. Daniel's heart skipped. He followed the file trail and found a private server. It was locked. But Daniel was good at breaking things, especially systems built by cheap contractors. 5 minutes later, the files opened. What he saw made him sick. There were pictures. Cale, weak and chained, being dragged down a narrow tunnel. Others like him too. Some barely alive. Some just bones. Notes labeled them as breeding stock and test material. One image showed a room filled with cages. No light, no air. Only suffering. Daniel backed away from the screen, heart pounding. This wasn't just slavery. It was slaughter in slow motion, and Cale was at the center of it. Daniel downloaded the files to a small chip. He didn't know what he would do with it yet, but something inside him had changed. He was no longer just a mechanic. He was a witness, and he couldn't walk away. The next morning, Daniel faked a maintenance order for the lower tunnels. He got clearance and took his tool bag, but inside was no wrench, just rations, light sticks, and the map he drew from the hacked files. The elevator to the lower levels smelled like oil and death. The walls were rusted. Pipes hissed like they were breathing. He reached level D, his boots echoed in the silence. There were no guards here, no cameras, just long, narrow paths with heavy doors on either side. He opened the first one, empty. The second, bones. The third, he heard a sound, a cough. Daniel pushed the door open slowly. There, chained to the back wall, was Cale. His eyes were barely open. His skin was dry and cracked. His legs were tied with thick wires. The collar around. His neck looked tighter. His arms hung down like broken ropes. Daniel rushed forward and dropped beside him. "Cale, it's me, Daniel. I came back." Cale turned his head slowly. His lips trembled. He couldn't speak, but his eyes filled with tears. Daniel opened his pack and gave him water, then gently cut the wires around his legs. "You're safe now," Daniel whispered. "I'm not leaving you again." Cale pointed at something behind Daniel. A shadow moved. Daniel froze. Footsteps. Someone was coming. Cale reached toward Daniel's tool bag and pulled out a tiny object. It was the chip recorder Cale had kept. It somehow hidden in the collar. He pressed it into Daniel's hand. His eyes said everything. If I don't make it, take this. Show the world. But Daniel grabbed his hand. No. You're coming with me. Kyle shook his head. His body was weak, too weak to run. But Daniel didn't care. He stood up, pulled Cale's arm over his shoulders and began to carry him. He didn't care if someone saw. He didn't care if he died trying, because Cale had no voice. But now, Daniel would speak for him. The tunnel was cold and dark. Each step Daniel took made a dull echo, as if the station itself was warning him to stop. Cale leaned heavily on his shoulder, barely conscious. His breath was slow and shallow. His legs dragged on the floor, and his body felt lighter than it should, like a person who hadn't eaten or moved in days. Daniel tightened his grip. He wasn't strong, but he had to be strong now. The path twisted. Pipes hissed. Somewhere above, alarms sounded for a system failure, not for them. No one knew they were here, or worse, someone did and was waiting. He reached a storage chamber, empty and full of shadows. Carefully, he laid Kyle down and checked the collar again. It was digging deep into the alien's neck, leaving bruises and scars. Daniel tried to cut it open with a tool, but it sparked and hissed. It was wired to explode. Daniel pulled his hand back in shock. What the hell? They rigged this thing to kill you? Kyle blinked slowly. Daniel sat beside him, hands shaking. We can't go through the main halls. Too many guards. We need another way. Some hidden path, anything. Kyle reached out weakly, pointing toward the far wall. There, hidden behind old crates, was a maintenance hatch. Daniel's eyes widened. You knew? Cale nodded once. Daniel helped him up again, and they crawled through the hatch. The narrow tunnel smelled like mold and rust. They moved in silence, only the soft sound of Cale breathing beside him. After 20 minutes, they reached a small metal grate. Daniel peeked through. Below was an old data room, abandoned, dark, dusty. He remembered the layout. This was where old research logs were stored, before the station upgraded to new systems. No guards came here. They climbed down. Daniel placed Cale on a bench and looked around. Terminals, old servers, broken screens, and one still working, faintly glowing. Daniel sat at the console and plugged in the data chip Cale had saved. Files opened. Dozens of files. Hundreds, each one worse than the last. Photos, medical reports, testing logs, breeding charts, pain readings, survival ratings, even video footage of experiments, alien slaves crying, fighting, begging in different languages. And in many of the files, Daniel saw Cale, younger, healthier, being pushed, shocked, forced. The station was more than a mining facility. It was a secret operation for genetic testing, slave development, alien control, and Cale. Cale was test subject Nugger 731. But he wasn't just any slave. He was the only survivor of Project Merge, a plan to break alien minds completely and rebuild them to obey humans without question. But Cale had never obeyed. He had stayed silent. Even after everything, he had held on to something inside. A small piece of himself, and they hated him for that. Daniel looked at Cale, who was now asleep, his chest rising slowly. A quiet fury grew inside Daniel. He downloaded everything onto a secure stick and disconnected. We need to get off this station, he whispered, and we need to show the galaxy what they did to you. He didn't notice the red light blinking near the door, a silent alarm. Back in the upper level, a guard looked up as his screen flashed. Unauthorized access. Detected, Sector B, abandoned data room. He picked up his comm. We've got rats in the walls. Daniel didn't know how long Cale had slept, but when the alien woke, he looked stronger. His fingers moved more freely. His eyes were clearer. Daniel smiled. Hey, you still with me? Cale gave a weak nod. Daniel pointed at the stick. This is our proof. With this we can stop them, maybe save others like you. Kyle reached for the stick, then placed his hand on his own chest. Daniel understood. You want to carry it? Kyle nodded. Daniel placed the stick in a small pouch and wrapped it under Kyle's torn shirt. Suddenly, a loud metal thud. Footsteps. Voices. There. In here. Daniel jumped up. They found us. He grabbed Kale again and helped him to the next hatch. But this one was locked. Manual override only. Kale turned to the left and kicked a panel. It popped open. Another hidden tunnel. Daniel stared. You've been here before, haven't you? Kyle's expression said everything. Yes, many times. In pain. They crawled inside just as a flashlight beam shined into the room behind them. We'll find them, said a voice. There's no way out. But there was a way, through the dark, through the forgotten paths, through hope. Daniel and Kale kept moving. They didn't speak. But in the silence, something had changed. Kale had no voice. But now he had a name again. And soon, the world would hear his story. Daniel had no idea how deep the maintenance tunnel went. The only light came from the small glow stick he carried, and Kale's weak breathing reminded him every moment why they had to keep going. The air felt tight, thick with dust and old metal. Kale leaned against Daniel with each step, but he never asked to stop. He couldn't speak, but his determination was louder than words. The tunnel curved sharply, then split into two directions. One way sloped upward toward the noise of machinery. The other went down into silence. Kyle pointed down. Daniel hesitated. Are you sure? Down seems like a death trap. Kale nodded. Daniel trusted him. He had to. Every second they stayed on the station, they risked being caught, or worse. They moved down. The silence grew heavier. The tunnel walls were covered in old markings, strange symbols, warning signs, and dried handprints. This part of the station had been forgotten for years, maybe longer. At the end of the path was a sealed metal door, half covered in dust and webs. Kale raised his hand and touched a worn control panel beside it. The screen blinked weakly. Daniel stepped forward and pulled out a power unit from his kit, connecting it to the panel. Sparks jumped, but then the lock hissed. The door opened with a groan. Inside was darkness, but not emptiness. Daniel's light showed what had been hidden. A room full of stasis pods, at least a dozen, lined against the walls. Most were broken. Some still hummed. Inside each one was a body. Aliens just like Kale. Different shapes, colors, sizes. All asleep or dead. Kale limped to one of the pods and placed his hand on it. The glass was cracked. Inside was a young alien boy, unmoving, eyes closed, chest still. Kale closed his eyes. A tear slipped down. Daniel whispered, "Were these your people?" Kale turned and gave a soft nod. Daniel felt sick. This wasn't just a prison. This was a grave. Kale walked to the back of the room and pulled aside a metal plate on the floor. Underneath was a small box, sealed and locked. He looked at Daniel and pointed to the box, then mimicked typing. Daniel understood. A terminal? Kale nodded. Daniel connected the box to his portable interface. The screen blinked on. Old, cracked, data loaded slowly. Then it opened. Project Merge. Final logs inside were voice recordings, journal entries, and personal logs from one of the lead scientists. Daniel played the first one. This is Dr. Thallen. Day 302. Merge subject number 731 continues. To resist programming, unlike the others, his mind holds on to original memory and emotion. It's fascinating, but dangerous. He has formed attachments. That is not allowed. Daniel's hands clenched. Another log played. Day 315. We had to silence the subject. Permanently. Voice box removed. He still communicates with other test groups using touch and signs. He teaches them to feel, to remember. We will isolate him in the lower vault. Kyle looked away. He didn't want Daniel to hear more, but Daniel kept going. Final log. Day 349. Subject attempted escape. Did not run for freedom. He tried to unlock the stasis pods, tried to wake the others. He was stopped. Punishment delivered. Project Merge is now under review. Daniel stopped the file. He turned to Kale, stunned. You didn't try to escape for yourself. You tried to save them. Kale lowered his head. That day he wasn't just punished. He was betrayed, locked away, and erased from the records. But he never gave up on the others. Daniel stood up, breathing hard. We need to show this. This will break them. These files, the bodies, the names, they tried to bury it all. Suddenly, a sharp sound. The door. It slammed shut. The control panel blinked red. They were locked in. Daniel rushed to the panel and tapped it, but it didn't respond. No. Someone triggered it from outside. Kale tapped his shoulder. He pointed toward a vent in the ceiling. It was small, but just big enough for one person. Daniel looked up. I can't fit, but maybe you can. Kale shook his head firmly. He wouldn't leave Daniel behind. Daniel pulled out the chip again. Listen, if something happens to me, you need to get this out. You can't die here. Kale stared at him, eyes wide. Then he stepped forward and hugged Daniel. Not weak, not afraid, but with purpose. Daniel helped Kale into the vent, lifted him carefully. Before Kale crawled in, he looked back, and for the first time, he tried to speak. Whisper. Broken. Faint. Thank you. It was barely sound, but it meant everything. Then he disappeared into the darkness above. Daniel turned back to the door, listening to footsteps getting closer outside. He stood his ground. He wouldn't run because even if he was caught, Kale was free, and now the galaxy would hear the truth. Kale crawled through the narrow air duct, every movement scraping his tired limbs against cold metal. The pain was sharp, but he didn't stop. His body was broken, but his will had turned to fire. Behind him, Daniel was trapped. Ahead, freedom waited, or maybe more danger. But Kale knew one thing for sure. He could not let Daniel's sacrifice be wasted. For the first time in his life, Kale had a mission. The duct led to a small maintenance room. He kicked out the metal grate and dropped down, landing hard on his knees. He groaned silently but forced himself to stand. He checked his chest. The memory stick Daniel had hidden in his pouch was still there. He looked around. The room was empty. A broken service bot lay on its side, wires hanging out. The only door led back into the working part of the station. Kale needed a disguise. He knelt beside the service bot, tearing cloth from its covering. With shaking hands, he wrapped it around his arms and legs. He found a worker's helmet under the desk, dusty but usable. When he looked in the mirror, he didn't recognize himself. Good. He pushed open the door and walked out into the hallway. No one noticed him. Everyone was too busy, fixing panels, moving cargo, following orders. Kale moved carefully, limping with purpose. His glowing eyes were hidden under the helmet's shade. He kept his head low. He had one goal: reach the loading bay. Meanwhile, inside the sealed stasis chamber, Daniel was still alive. The soldiers hadn't reached him yet, but they were close. He used the time to open more files, send signals through hidden lines, trying to transmit the data outward. But the connection was too weak. Blocked. His only hope now was Kale. Daniel had no way of knowing if Kale made it out, but he believed. Kale reached the loading bay entrance. A tall guard stood blocking the door. He was a large alien with thick skin and cold eyes. Kyle paused, heart pounding. If he turned around now, it would look suspicious, so he moved forward. The guard growled, "ID?" Kyle froze. His throat was dry. He reached into his pocket, pretending to fumble for a pass card. He moved slowly. Every second was borrowed time. Then, from the hallway behind them, an alarm blared. Security breach. Level 4. Contain all lower access tunnels. The guard turned, distracted. What now? Kyle didn't wait. He slammed his shoulder into the control panel using all his weight. The door hissed open. The guard turned, shouting, but Cale was already inside. The loading bay was chaos. Ships being loaded, crates moving, workers yelling. Cale looked around. Then he saw it, a small courier ship with its hatch still open. No guards nearby. Perfect. He rushed toward it, his breath short, limbs shaking. Each step felt like lifting. Stones. He climbed into the ship and fell into the pilot's seat. He had never flown before, but during his years in silence, locked in cages, he had watched, observed. He closed the hatch and turned on the main engine. The ship roared to life. Outside, alarm screamed. Guards ran toward the ship, weapons ready. Unauthorized launch detected. Repeat, stop that ship. Kyle's fingers danced over the controls. The ship trembled, engines flaring. He tapped the final button. The bay doors above opened. The guards fired. The ship took off. Shots hit the hull. Sparks flew. But Kyle was flying, free. Inside the ship, Kyle opened the terminal and inserted the SIU memory chip. He connected it to the ship's internal beacon and began uploading. Every file, every image, every voice log, he broadcasted it out. Not to one person, but to all known channels. Public, military, civilian. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The truth would speak for him. Back on the station, Daniel smiled. In the sealed chamber, one small light blinked green. Upload successful. He sat down, tired but proud. A voice echoed from the hallway. Open the door. We know you're in there. Daniel stood, lifted his hands, and waited. He wasn't afraid. They could take him. But the secret was out. On nearby space stations, people received the data. Leaders, soldiers, reporters, activists. All of them saw Cale's suffering. All of them saw what the station had done. Within hours, protests began. Within days, rescue ships were launched. And Cale, the alien who had no voice, became a symbol across the stars. Not of pain, but of hope. The stars stretched out before Cale, silent and endless as the stolen courier ship drifted through open space. Alarms still blinked across the dashboard. The ship's hull was damaged, the fuel low. But Cale was alive. And more than that, he had done it. The truth had been sent. The images, the screams, the hidden experiments. His life, his pain, and the pain of others. It was all out there now. The galaxy would know. The world could no longer pretend he didn't exist. But freedom came with a cost. Cale sat in the pilot's seat, barely able to hold himself upright. The journey had taken its toll. His body was weak, covered in cuts and bruises. The pain in his chest had grown worse, each breath felt heavy. But he didn't cry. Not anymore. He had already given everything he had, and now, he only wished to see Daniel one last time. Back at the station, chaos had erupted after the files leaked. Ships from the Galactic Council were dispatched immediately. The mining station was marked as hostile. Investigators swarmed in, shutting down systems, locking staff in cells, and rescuing anyone still alive. But Daniel was gone. The soldiers found the sealed room. The door had been forced open by emergency override, but inside they found only his uniform, soaked in blood, and his ID tag lying on the floor. A burn mark on the wall suggested a fight. Some believed he was taken, some feared he was executed, but no one knew for sure. Until a message arrived, untraceable, from deep space. Just 3 words. He is safe. Kyle didn't know how long he might floated. The ship's power dropped to emergency level. The lights dimmed. The engines died. He closed his eyes and rested in the silence. That's when the beacon blinked, an incoming signal. Kyle weakly reached for the screen. A ship approached. Small, fast medical class. The logo of the Galactic Emergency Alliance flashed across the hull. They had found him. When Cale woke, he was on a soft bed, wrapped in clean blankets. Medical bots buzzed quietly around him. For the first time in years, he felt warm. Safe. He tried to speak, but pain tightened his throat. A nurse touched his shoulder gently. "You're okay. Rest." He tried to sit up, but then he saw someone standing near the doorway. Daniel. Cale's eyes widened. Daniel looked tired, bandages on his arm, a cut on his forehead, but he was smiling. "You really did it?" Daniel said softly. "You sent it all?" "They shut the place down. They're hunting the ones who ran." Kyle opened his mouth. No words came, just a whisper of breath. But it didn't matter. Daniel walked closer and sat beside him. "You saved more lives than anyone ever will. They want to give you medals, a name, a home." Kale looked down at his hands. He still felt the weight of chains. Daniel reached out and gently placed something in his palm, his old ID tag from the cage, scratched and bent. But across the metal, someone had etched a new name. Kyle. Free Kyle stared at it. His hands shook. Tears filled his eyes. The Galactic Council held a press conference a week later. Cameras pointed from every world, every system. A quiet room filled with leaders, citizens, and victims' families. At the center stood a translator bot. It played a recording, not of music, not of words, but of one voice, broken, slow. It said, "I was silent, but not dead. I lived, I remember. And now, I am free." The room went quiet, then rose with thunderous applause. Kale and Daniel didn't stay for the ceremony. They chose a quiet planet, green and peaceful, where no one asked questions and no one gave orders. A place where Kale could walk in the sun without fear. Kale built things now. Small devices, tools, even a school for rescued aliens. Many of them had no names, no families, just like him once. Daniel worked beside him, always nearby. They didn't talk much, they didn't have to, because what they had in was more than words, it was trust, it was family. And it had been earned, with pain, with risk, and with sacrifice. That was the price of freedom. And Kale paid it. Not for himself alone, but for all who had been silenced. The sun rose gently over the green hills of the quiet planet Kale now called home. Morning mist floated over the fields, and the sound of water flowing from the nearby stream filled the air. It was peaceful, something Kale had never known in the cages, the labs, or the dark tunnels. He stood in the garden outside the small stone house he and Daniel built with their own hands. His hands, once chained, were now covered in soil, planting life instead of surviving death. Around him, small alien children played, laughed, and helped. All of them had once been slaves. Some were born in cages, others rescued too late to remember where they came from. But here, they were safe. Here, they healed. Kyle could not speak well. His voice was still broken, but he didn't need words to be heard anymore. His actions had become his voice. His eyes, his kindness, and his strength said more than any sentence ever could. Every week, more people arrived. Survivors from hidden systems, escaped workers, even humans who had turned against the corrupt systems. Daniel managed the arrivals. He built shelters and trained young ones, but it was Kale the children followed. They listened when he taught with his hands. They sat quietly when he walked through the fields, and when he pointed to the sky, they looked up as if hope itself lived in the stars. One day a ship landed in the village. It wasn't a rescue team or supply carrier. It was a visitor from the Galactic Council, a female ambassador named Sira Vel. Her armor shone with silver, and her eyes were sharp, but her voice was gentle. She had come with a request. "We are rebuilding the Council of Voices," she told Kale and Daniel. "We want survivors to be part of it. Not just politicians. Real people. Kale, we want you to be one of them." Daniel looked at Kale. "You deserve this." Kale lowered his head. He remembered the pain, the fear, the endless silence. Could he face them again? Could he stand before those who once ignored his suffering? He stepped forward slowly and reached into his old pouch. From it, he took out a bent metal tag, the one Daniel gave him. "Kale, Free. He handed it to Sira, then placed his hand on his chest, over his heart. Sira understood. She smiled. Will, make sure your voice is heard, whether spoken or silent. The day Kale entered the Great Hall of the Galactic Council, the galaxy watched. Millions across systems tuned in to see the former slave who had changed history. Some had doubted the truth. Others had tried to bury it. But Kale stood now not as a victim, but as a symbol. Daniel stood beside him, calm and proud. As Kale walked to the center stage, a translator device lit up. He tapped it once. Slowly, a voice began to play. His own, recorded with effort, each word soft and broken, but filled with power. My name is Kyle. I was silenced, but I am not weak. I was forgotten, but not gone. I lived in cages. I was called a number. I was told to obey, but I remembered my name, and I remembered others. I carried their names with me, and now I speak for all of them. The entire chamber fell silent. Kale raised his hand, not to demand, not to fight, but to offer peace. Then, something amazing happened. One by one, people stood, human, alien, leaders, warriors, refugees, survivors. All stood. Some wept, some clapped, some placed their hands on their hearts. Kale didn't say anything more. He didn't have to. His silence spoke louder than any speech ever could. Years passed. The station that once held Kale was turned into a museum of truth. Children visited it to learn about the darkness and how light came from it. New laws were passed. Slavery was hunted down across systems. Those who once gave orders in shadows were brought to justice. But Kale stayed in the hills, with Daniel, with the children. He taught farming. He built with stone. He sat under the stars quietly, watching as the galaxy changed. One night, a child sat beside him. A small girl with golden skin and curious eyes. Kyle, she whispered, why don't you talk like others? Kyle smiled gently. He picked up a flower and gave it to her. She tilted her head. That's your answer? He nodded. She thought, for a moment, then giggled. You're funny. Kyle laughed softly, more of a breath than a sound. But it was enough. Because in that moment he knew he didn't need a perfect voice. He just needed to keep living, keep showing, keep healing, and that was enough. The galaxy had heard him. Now it was time to build a future where no one would ever be silenced again.